Welcome to Liberate Your People Pleaser. I am Brenda, Florida, certified life coach, and you might be a people pleaser if you tend to prioritize other people's wants and needs over your own. If you're the peacemaker, if you're always trying to create harmony with the people that you work with and live with, you probably are also an amazing problem solver. You have great intuition. And you're probably an empath, or at least have great skills of empathy. And the reason why I call this Liberate Your People Pleaser and not Fix Your People Pleaser is there's nothing to fix. There's nothing wrong with you. These are fantastic qualities that you have, really superpowers that you just naturally possess and instinctively use. And what gets problematic about them is when they get turned around on other people all the time and not on yourself. And what do I mean by that? Empathy. You can understand how another person feels, you understand their perspective, or you can put yourself in their shoes. And when you do that, you may be prone to giving up your own feelings, your own position, your own perspective, and you make theirs more important. So you're prioritizing what they feel or think or their position over your own. And that's when things start to go awry for us. And so in this podcast, each episode, we'll talk about different ways that we can power up those great skills that we have and use them for ourselves first, and then give to others out of that fullness, rather than prioritizing everyone else. So it doesn't make us selfish when we stop prioritizing everybody else. What it does is allows us to have the power that we need internally, the confidence and the clarity that we need internally, to then go impact the world in an even more powerful way. So I'm Brenda, Florida, certified life coach, and I'm so glad you're with us. Let's liberate your people pleaser. Welcome everyone to this episode of Liberate Your People Pleaser. I'm really excited today to have a guest, as I am prone to do from time to time. Dominey Drew is with us, and I'm going to let her share with you a little bit of her story and more about herself in a moment. But it was just such an interesting way that Dominey and I met and even had our initial conversation, which turned out completely different than how it started, and which takes us to our title for today of Pleasure as the Gateway. This is the warning you might want to put your headphones on if you're listening to this in any sort of shared audience situation or children's ears or something, because we're likely to drop an F-bomb or two, and we're definitely going to use the three-letter word sex. Yeah. So it's really fun to be here with you today, Dominey. And I'll let everybody know that, so our connection started with a long history that we both share of people pleasing and a natural connection with those things. A lot of Dominey's work is with men and women in their dating lives or relationships. And so that was really interesting. So I thought we were going to talk about all that. And then I saw this part of her bio that said something about a thesis she wrote. And it got us off on this topic, which we also both share a passion for, which is the idea of sex and pleasure. Okay, because sex is pleasure, or it should be. Ideally, it is. And of course, pleasure is also includes a lot of other things as a gateway to our spiritual and personal growth. Not as like this sideline thing that if there's time, we're going to do that this week, right? And this doesn't matter if you're married or single. I have been single for most of 20 years. I haven't had a date now, not totally on purpose, but just the way life has happened for me. I haven't even been on a date in 2.5 years, which means I've been celibate for 2.5 years, which is not how I typically roll, single or not. So this is going to be a very frank conversation about how sex and pleasure has played a role in our own personal and spiritual growth, so that you can hopefully really just take this in, just like sort of bracket whatever Preconceived ideas that you may have about the role of sex in your life or the role of pleasure in your life, and allow yourself to just really be open to this conversation we're going to have today, because that's where the magic happens, right? When we kind of drop our stories, the Buddhists call it the don't know mind, of dropping those stories of what we think that means, what the resistance we may have to it, or the fears we may have around it, and just allow yourself to open up into what we're going to share. Because I will tell you, in my own background, I was sexually abused when I was a little girl. That was so traumatic for me, and I had no one in my life near me that was safe to talk to about it. And so I repressed that memory, as many of us do who experience trauma, until I was in my early 30s, and then it just came to me in a flash. So that's a disruption in your day. uh, and so then I dealt with, unpacking that and healing from that sexual trauma. But of course, by then, so in my early 30s, I had already been married more than 10 years. I got married at 18 to my high school sweetheart. And so we had, not surprisingly, a very dysfunctional sexual relationship. I thought I was frigid. When he and I separated, one of my first thoughts was, oh, yay, I never have to worry about having sex again. And I was 35 years old. So I've gone from like the worst relationship to myself sexually. I didn't even understand. This is going to, sound impossible, but it's true. I did not understand I could bring myself to an orgasm myself. I hardly knew what an orgasm was, except you hear people say it. So like, it's a thing, but I hadn't experienced it until I was probably 27 or so, because it was after my fourth child was born, and he was born when I was 26. So, I mean, that's how like backwards, repressed. I grew up in a religious culture and a family culture that shamed sex. I had no information. I got married as a virgin. So here I am, 35. I've had one partner. We had, not good sex. And I think I hate it. To liberation into that, and seeing how that opened me up spiritually and everything. So that's a big fat introduction. And now, Dominey, I'll let you say something. So, being here with me, and for the really synchronistic way we even came upon this topic. And I can't wait for you to tell everybody about yourself, what you're doing, and your thoughts on the matter.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. I loved our connection. There was just sparks right away. I love it when that happens. And it was really this immediate sort of, as you said, synchronicity or synergy between us on this particular topic. And I love this topic, and I don't see it often talked about. And I think it's a really important thing to talk about, because the human relationship with joy is quite a distorted one in these days. We tend to see what we want and turn and go the other direction. And that's actually where I specialize. I am a relationship and self-mastery coach, and I help people literally master their inner game. So whether that's because you're a terrible people pleaser, I was also a just unmanageable people pleaser. It was constant. And now I have these amazing boundaries that are just, fluid, yet, firm, yet fluid,
Yes.
Firm, yet flexible type of, but very, it's easy. I'm not afraid of confrontation. I'm not afraid to stand in my power. I speak my mind. I'm more direct. And all of those things came once I was able to find what it was underneath the surface that was causing the people pleasing in the first place. And so now, regardless of what people are going through, whether it's you're single and you don't know why, or you can't meet the kind of partner that you want, or it's your relationship with yourself, you have low self-confidence, or you don't exactly know who you are. I have an entire program called The Art of Authenticity that's literally geared toward like showing you where it is that you're trying to be someone else and how that's causing problems and how to fix it. And so that's really the realm where I love to work. Yeah, that's been the journey so far.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Mm.
So take us into this topic of sex and pleasure, and maybe tell us some of your own story, with your own journey in the sexual arena, and what brought you to really seeing it as a gateway to personal and spiritual growth.
Yeah, it was interesting. As you were speaking earlier, I was reflecting on when I had my awakening moment. I woke up in a way when I was 14.
Mm.
And by wake up, I just sort of mean that I was reading a particular book. And the experience I'm going to share also was from this book. But the waking up experience was kind of just like realizing, almost like waking up for a dream, realizing that the world was not as everybody had told me that it was.
Mm.
And I was reading this book called Conversations with God.
Mhm.
I did not grow up particularly religious at all. We were quite secular. And then my parents got divorced and we went to church, I don't know, for like a little while. And then when I was about the same time, when I was 14, I became Quaker. My mother
Oh,
became the Quaker faith. Uh-huh.
oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and the Quakers are brilliant. There's the fundamental belief is that there's that of God in everyone. So there's no hierarchy amongst anyone. And of course, that got them in
Mm.
big
Nice.
trouble in the back in the 1500s in the UK.
Right.
But it was really it's really this sort of very inward listening for the voice within type of journey. It's quite Buddhist really in that way,
Hmm.
even though it's Christian based. And so in that sort of journey, so I'm reading this book, Conversations with God, and I remember reading this part. I was 14. I had no education. My mother was incredibly uncomfortable with sex. So I had it was never talked about. It was never, I mean, I got my period and didn't know what was happening
Right.
that moment when it was happening. Like, it was that type of thing where like, oh, I guess maybe we should have that talk.
Yeah.
And so not a lot of comfort there. And so I'm sitting out on my back porch and I'm reading this book. And he asks, the Conversation with God, the format is this man is an author and he just starts jotting down all these, because he's angry and he's frustrated about his life, and he asks, writes down all these questions very, very quickly, and sort of is the wave kind of ends and he stops writing, and suddenly his hand starts moving and he starts channeling through and writing these answers. And the first question that came out was, do you want answers to these questions, or are you just venting?
Mm.
His hands literally moving. He doesn't know what's coming on the paper, and so he's literally channeling what he sort of identifies as God or source, right?
Yes.
And so I'm reading this book and he's talking to God, and he asks something about sex, and I just remember God responding through him saying, well, sex is supposed to be fun. Why would I give you something that had pleasure that you weren't supposed to do?
Right.
Like how fucked up is that?
Right.
I don't think that part was in the book, but that's what I heard.
Right. In our version of the book, it says, how fucked up is that?
Yeah, how fucked up would that be? Like, what kind of God does that? He loves you. But also, if you fuck it up, then you're going to be going to hell and you're going to stay there for eternity. So,
of course, there's that. Yeah.
And so I just remembered, at this point, again, I'm 14. I have no experience I'd never even had a boyfriend or anything. I don't know what that was. And I remember him just saying, it's fun. And I felt a template shift. I felt my beliefs shift about being like, oh, it's supposed to be fun. And then when I started having my sexual experiences, they also weren't great. I'm sure that's quite typical. And I think was also a typical response was I thought there was something wrong with me.
Of course. Of course.
The age-old tale.
we all think it's us, right? Yeah.
Yep. Because I had no idea how to fix it. But I just remember thinking, the experience I'm having is not matching the reaction I'm seeing other people have around this topic in life. Like, right. You can tell that people are making a bigger deal out of this than this.
Right.
Like it is.
Either they're all lying or I am not having the same experience.
Something's off here. Yes, wrong. Exactly right. Mm-hmm. And so I really, and I had sort of an awakening kind of later in my life in that area. But what's really has just blossomed through this is that in those tangible moments of pleasure, of exploring pleasure, and I had a very difficult time allowing myself to feel pleasure. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to go. I just didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
For like a lot of my life, and I was deeply insecure, and I had body image issues. I was uncomfortable in my body, as I kept doing this underlying work that I now teach, this process work, each of those issues began to fall off. So the people pleasing was one of them. I just suddenly didn't feel the need to do that anymore. Wasn't even conscious before. It's just how I was. And then suddenly I just wasn't that way anymore. And then my body shifted. I shifted what I was holding on to that was keeping the weight on my body. And suddenly the weight dropped off my body. I mean, dropped off my body. I went from not being able to lose it to I couldn't keep it on.
Okay.
And so it was really this total turnaround because I solved the underlying problem, you know? And so it's really been this incredible journey, and I'm fascinated really by humans' relationship with joy and pleasure.
Yes, I agree. So let's break this down a little bit, because I always like to be very practical and pragmatic as well with my podcast and everything else I do, because while I love the big sort of lofty ideas and, you know, this idea that, oh, pleasure could be the way, and maybe instead of working so hard and pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps and all those, especially for people pleasers, all the do, right? Like people pleasers are generally really good at getting things done. We're very action oriented and goal driven and all these things. We solve problems and we do all these things, which is why I talk about people pleasing almost like it's a double-edged sword. Like we have those gifts. And when we're in the dysfunctional side of people pleasing, we're using them all towards other people, right? Like all the focus is how can I prioritize you, do what you need, you know, solve the problems you have. Like it's all outer other focused. And when we're using our people pleasing gifts as a superpower, it's because we've turned them all towards ourselves. Okay. So now, which doesn't mean I'm selfish and I don't care about others. It means I move into service to others out of that fullness of I've first prioritized myself. So, and I do for myself and I experience for myself, and then I give out of that. And so that's sort of the perspective I take with it. And so rather than just having this idea that pleasure and desires can help us in that transformation from even the you know, from the people pleasing things, we'll just call them, being transferred to an inward gift instead of an outward dysfunction, the idea that our desires and sex and pleasure can take us there, I think to many seems probably counterintuitive. And what I notice, and you kind of mentioned this too, so maybe we just start here, is that a lot of times, just like myself, we've been so stuck in the outer expression of people pleasing, we don't even know what we desire. We don't even know what gives us pleasure. We may have resistance, like you were saying, to pleasure. So like how, for you, how did you crack open that door from resistance to exploring?
So first, let me say that the way you perceive it is actually quite accurate, in the sense that there are two aspects to the people pleaser, quote unquote, right? There's I like you call it a superpower. That's actually great. I call it a core quality. It's something that you naturally do. If I put you in a white room, you know, with no windows, you will naturally, you know, solve problems and do all the things that you want to do. So that's your core quality, right? When you're living life from that place, it is effortless, it is fulfilling, and it is successful. By definition. This is going to bring us back to pleasure as well. When you become afraid, that's when you distort or overwhelm. That's when you distort your natural gifts. And that's when it comes out as, quote, people pleasing. So I'm still a people pleaser in the sense that I give a shit about other people, and I want to help. In a blank white room by myself, I will want to help. I'm like, oh, where are we? Should I go over here? Oh, somebody put some food down. Okay. Should I hand this plate back to you? How do I, you know what I mean?
Right.
I'm still doing me. Right.
Right.
But then it becomes what we refer to as people pleasing when it's done out of defense. I need you to love me.
Yeah.
Or if you're not okay, I'm not okay. So I have to make sure you're okay. So these are all right coming out of defense.
Yes, it's that seeking love and approval, validation,
Yes.
all those things from others instead of
Yes.
being able to give it to ourselves.
Yes. And the process of being able to do that is exactly what I help people do, is to show you,
Mhm.
great, how do I stop people pleasing? By giving it to yourself. How do I do
Yes.
that? Great. Here's the process. You go in, you connect, you find your little, that
Yeah.
little piece, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, because what that just triggered for me was this idea. And one of the things that made me realize as I went from being, thinking sex was just not fun, I must be frigid, like this is just me, right? Like I'm broken when it comes to sex.
Yeah.
And of course, when you've had sexual
Yeah.
trauma, it's easy enough to think that, like, okay, now I know why I'm broken now. I mean, because all those years we were married and I just never wanted to have sex. I just thought,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I thought there was something wrong with me, but I didn't understand why. When I had the flashback, then at least kind of it made sense. It's like, well, of course, now I get why I have, so many negative feelings towards that. Now, in the end, that was whatever, 20 plus years ago when I had that flashback and then left that marriage. And now I know that there's nothing wrong with me sexually and I love having sex. And what was wrong was that there was a lack of intimacy in our marriage. So, I mean, we could go on, we could have a podcast that lasts 3 days probably on this, but we won't, folks. You don't have to worry about that. But one of the aspects of that is, I think, in relationships, and you can tell me if you agree, because we obviously didn't rehearse any of this. So I don't know if you're going to agree or not, but I don't think sexual problems in a relationship, there's a few exceptions, but most of them are not about sex. It's about the relationship, or it may be about something physical in the body, right? Like you could have an impotency problem or, all kinds of other like real physical things. But usually, to use a broad brush, word, it's a lack of intimacy emotionally. So then how do we have intimacy physically? How do I put your body in my body as a female being heterosexual? So that's what I do. How do I do that and have fun, enjoy that?
Yes.
When we have nothing, which is different. So this is why I think you can enjoy a one night stand. For those of us who have done those, I can have tons of fun on a one night stand because there's no pretense of intimacy. But what, so that's just fun. That's just, I call it recreational sex, right? Like we're just gonna, it's a thing to do and it's fun. And so we're gonna go do that as consenting adults. But when I'm in a relationship with somebody, then there's this bigger container that needs to include that emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy. And when that's missing, it becomes very hard to have recreational sex because that's not really the container that you're in at that point.
Interesting. I would say that there's it's actually entirely possible to have that level of intimacy in a one night stand.
Okay, say more about that.
If you are open to it, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because a lot of people think that one night stands are bad and like monogamous, ongoing, lasting relationships are good.
Yeah.
And especially with me as a dating coach, they're like, oh, well, obviously I don't want to be single. I'm like, oh, that's not obvious to me. Like people come to me, obviously they don't want to be single, but like, yeah, be single. Being single is great. I've been single for most of my life. Some of it I was happy about. A lot of it I wasn't. Worked through my issues.
Right.
But that's really, it's a connection with another human can look like anything. Take our call, right? We had like a 15-minute call and we ended up talking for like 30 minutes.
Right.
And we just connected immediately, and it was incredibly open, and we learned about each other very, very quickly. And so, if you're open to it, and you don't need to be, it could also just be perfectly fun without intimacy. But a one night stand can be incredibly sacred relationship. Another thing that I think is really sacred, people leave out a lot, is the friends with benefits relationship.
Yes.
I think the friends with benefits relationship is an incredibly sacred thing.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's tricky. So I'm really glad you made that distinction, because you're right about that. Like it's maybe a better way to say it is there can be intimacy, that's super appropriate for that moment, right? So if we've only known each other for a few hours.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like they're probably almost, we don't have to debate this, but there has to be a connection generally, you know, for me, which doesn't mean everybody does it that way. I have to have some kind of connection before I just fall in bed with you, but not everybody does it that way. And I love that you said, like, there's no right or wrong. So here we are, however many minutes into this, and I probably should have started here, but this is my point of this conversation. And I so agree with you that we don't talk about it enough. And part of it fundamentally is that we must drop our judgments around our own sex lives and others. So if monogamy is not your thing, that's okay. Doesn't make you a bad person. You know, couples that swing, you know, like I've met some couples that swing, and it's just the sweetest thing, like the way they talk about it and the way it keeps
they're so happy.
Fun. Yes, they're so fucking happy. Maybe we should all do it. You know,
lifestyle couples are some of the happiest couples I've ever come across. They are so happy. They love their lives. They're so secure. They're just they love it. I had a couple who were swingers on my podcast as well, on the Art of Attraction podcast, and they talked all about like how they met and what the lifestyle was like and how the marriage was like, because they're married to each other, and like it's
so much fun. Yeah. So that's part of it. And this is why, so our whole point was how can all these things possibly be part of personal and spiritual growth? Well, isn't that it? When we can drop judgment, like that would solve all the problems in the world right there. If we could drop judgment and fucking love each other and love ourselves, you know, that's that, you know, that's the highest level.
Yeah, if you could even just do the loving yourself part, the other one will come.
Yeah, the other one will come. That's true. That's true. And the other thing that I love about sex, and this is what I started figuring out, as I thankfully in my own journey after I got divorced, even though for a while I was really glad that I would never have to have sex again. I thought, well, I'm only 35 years old and I'll
maybe just one more time.
Yeah. So I'll probably date again. Like I was always in relationships up until that point. Now I've spent 20 years single, but you know, at the ripe old age of 35, I started dating my husband when I was 15. You know, we dated some other people for, you know, his early college, my rest of my high school. And then we get married when I'm 18, 2 months after I graduate. So like, since I'm 15 years old, I've been with somebody. Right.
Yeah.
And then I'm married to him for a long time. And, you know, so but I'm only 35. So I'm like, okay, probably I'm going to date again and I couldn't imagine myself being single. I never saw myself being single. And so then I'm like, well, shoot, because I didn't say fuck back then. So I said, shoot. I didn't either. This guy's going to want, whoever this guy is, he's going to want to have sex. And the one thing I know is that I know nothing about how to be a good sexual partner. Like, I don't know anything about good sex except, you know, this was the 80s and 90s of the super hot sex that Tom Cruise had with Kelly McGillis in Top Gun, right? Like, such a hot scene. And so PG rated really now when I watch it again, but it was so hot, right? So I'm like, okay, like, I don't know how to do this. So for me, I started watching porn so that I could figure out, like, I didn't know what to do. Okay. So it was like my Sesame Street. That was my joke. Porn is my Sesame Street for sex. And then I had my first boyfriend, and he was, you know, just a delightful man, very different. In fact, one of the things he said to me at one point was, he didn't use people pleasing. That wasn't his word. I can't remember what he called it, but he was like, your people pleasing qualities about you are my least favorite. And so for the first time in my life, I had a man who didn't want me to be a people pleaser with him. And that's very liberating. And he was outstanding sexually.
Excellent.
Yeah. Even many years later and many other partners later, I can still look back and go, yep, he was very good. And so he was perfect for me because I was so afraid. You know, I was so afraid to be that vulnerable with somebody, and it was so delightful. And one of the things I realized, taking us back to the point of how this helps us in our personal and spiritual growth, is that when I was having really good sex with him, I was really present. And I was very connected to my body, which was something I didn't even know what that meant. I was so, I had so much disconnect from my physical body that I wouldn't have even been able to say that at the time. I can look back on it now and realize that's part of what was happening. Was it was my first connection into my body, because like many people who are sexually traumatized and other traumas, you know, we disassociate from our bodies. And so that ability to be present and tune into your body. I mean, again, two of the biggest personal and spiritual growth skills of life, and you can practice them right there in the bedroom, even by yourself, right? Yes. I don't have to, I've still been doing that for the last 2.5 years, even though I haven't been with a person in 2.5 years. So it doesn't matter, you know, whether you're partnered or you're not, or there's a person or there's not, you can connect, that what you were saying, that going inside and connecting to discover who you are.
Yes. And boom, there it is, the human journey.
Yes.
That's it. That's all there is. That's all you go to an ashram in India, all they have is thousands of years worth of techniques to help you do exactly that.
Yes.
Right? Because the spiritual, you know, the enlightenment, spirituality is just the consciously lived life. It's just about learning to be here now. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So no better note to leave on than that, although I could talk to you for days, but to wrap up, and just so you guys know, of course, in the show notes, we'll put Domine's contact information and maybe a link to your podcast and, you know, whatever, all the things. So we'll put that in the show notes. And so as we wrap up, what's the one big takeaway, I guess, that you might want for everybody to have from our episode together today?
Well, you brought up being really action oriented. I think that's very important. So I'd like to give a little suggestion for a thing that listeners can do to actually explore this. So take some time alone, even if you haven't masturbated before, or if you're not comfortable touching yourself or something like that. You can even just do it sensually, you know, get naked, get under the covers if you're more comfortable. But if you're just comfortable touching yourself, spend some time, close your eyes, feel your body. And if you, and take your time, like do it as slowly as possible, and connect the way that you're touching yourself with your breath. Just breathe and touch yourself. Often when pleasure starts to escalate sexually, you'll cut off your breathing. Try to breathe more instead, and that helps you to stay present. And so sex, the way we're talking about it, is just like yoga. Yoga is not a thing. Yoga is actually meaningless. They're just poses, they're just asanas to give you something to do while you're practicing being conscious and present.
Yes.
Yes,
that's such a great, I never thought of that. What a great metaphor. It is the same as yoga. Yeah.
And so in that way, you're just being present. And so just explore what it's like to really be there. And if you leave, stop, and then come back, bring your awareness back, and start again. And this is a way that you can really expand your relationship with yourself.
I love that. And I love that you said sensual, because that is so true. And I think that in my journey, that was a big opening for me, even as I was still married. But I guess it was probably once I figured out I could masturbate, then that sort of opened up the door to just exploring that kind of sensual, like feeling just something as small as the lotion I'm putting on my body, right? Yes. Do I like the way it smelled? Like, am I getting pleasure out of the product itself? Instead of just any old greasy thing, slap it, you know, does the job, whatever. So I got to where I only purchased things I was putting on my body, my skin, my makeup, my, you know, whatever, that I really love, products that I love the smell of, love the feel of, and then paying attention. Like as I rub that on my legs, or I, you know, wear it all over my body, what does it feel like? What does my body feel like when I'm touching it?
Yes.
It's such an opening, because you will find parts of your body that maybe surprisingly you actually don't even enjoy yourself touching.
Yep.
Or you just kind of don't have a lot of sensation there, but ooh, you know, over there I do. I love the way that feels, you know, or whatever. Yeah. And so it is that self-exploration, right? And again, isn't that the whole journey, right? It's the micro of the macro. It's that self-exploration. We were made, let's go back to God. Let's go back to the beginning. Circle back to what you said at the beginning. We were made to have pleasure.
Yes.
In millions of ways. Trees, oceans, our bodies, hummingbirds. I have this hummingbird feeder, and it's like a parade of hummingbirds all the time now on my patio. You know, it's pleasure. And when we can stop judging that and let it be okay, like give ourselves that internal permission to experience pleasure, it opens up a floodgate of other joys and opportunities for growth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Humans are meant to lead joyful lives.
Yes.
When we say no to ourselves, when we say no to our joy, then we become less happy. If you say yes to your joy, it leads you on the path that your system most naturally wants to take, the best path for you.
Yes.
So follow what lights you up.
Yes. Beautiful. Well, on that lovely note, we will close our episode for today, but I look forward to having more conversations. Dominey and I are exploring other things, so you'll probably hear more about us and from us later, but love to hear your comments, of course, as always, you know, wherever you're getting this, or in my private Facebook group or wherever, because I think this is a really powerful conversation that we need to be having more often. Thank you, Dominey.
Agreed. Thank you so much for having me, Brenda.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Liberate Your People Pleaser. I've got some extra bonuses for you today, so check out the show notes. You will see a link to download my free training. This is the newest training I have. It's called People Pleasers Power Training. It's a video series and worksheet that will take you through a very specific process where you will take your power back from a relationship or a situation that has you feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, frustrated, angry, all of the above. So grab that. I also have people ask me about how they actually work with me. And so the easiest way to do that is to book a 15-minute call. So you'll see that link in the show notes, and we'll have a conversation about whether now is the right time, whether I'm the right coach, and how you would like to engage in that with me. There's also the link to my private Facebook group, Liberate Your People Pleaser. It's a great place to get additional resources and be in a like-minded community. You can also submit a question through the show notes. There's a link for you to tell me what it is that you're wondering, a topic you'd like for me to address on a future episode of Liberate Your People Pleaser. So thank you for being here as always. If you can take the time to do it, I love it. If you put a 5-star review on the podcast server that you get this podcast from, that always helps us get out to more listeners. So thank you so much. And thank you for being with me on the journey to liberate our people pleasers.